Christy, welcome back to my channel and welcome to day 6 of my 2022 holiday card series. Today I'm going to be using the Hello Bluebird Merry Carolers stamp set. So I've stamped my images on Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn jet black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. So I'm going to start in the center with my reindeer, and I wanted to use some E50s for him. I'm using E57, E55, and E53, and I'm going to start with that E57, laying in a little shadow around the edges of his face and where his ears attach to his head. I'll also put some on the underside of his arms and where his arms overlap his belly, where that would be casting a shadow. And just following the lines there, making sure not to add too deep of a shadow so I can keep this card looking nice and bright. Also come down the right side of his body, since his scarf is hanging down on that side, casting a shadow on that side of his body, and then down his legs. And I also put a shadow on the right side of his neck just to match the legs. And then I'm going to come in with the E55 and begin to blend that out. Especially with the darker colors, I like to color with the mid-tone in circular motions to kind of break up the edge of that really dark shade so you don't get a harsh line. So that's what I'm doing, kind of just doing little scribbly motions to make sure that I get a softer, smoother blend from the shadow into the mid-tone. So I'm just following all of those lines, and then I'll come in with the E57 again and just add a little shadow up above his muzzle so that kind of looks like it's protruding out. And then I will use the E53 for my highlight and just fill in all the rest of that space. Again, kind of doing those little scribbly circular motions to pull that mid-tone into the highlighted area. This also kind of helps make them look nice and fuzzy and is great for like fur, you know, just to give it a tiny bit of texture. So I'm just going to continue working down his legs and filling in the rest of him. And then I'm going to switch up slightly for his face. I'll use E51 and E50. Starting with the E51, I'll add a little of that to the inside of his ears and then around the edges of his face. And then I'm going to blend that out with the E50. And I did leave a little bit of white space around his nose and then on the base of his tail. So then I'm going to darken things up a bit and go with E47 and E44. And I'm going to use those for his antlers, adding a little of the E47 first. I'll also use this on his hooves, and then blending out with the E44 just to give them a bit of a darker look. You could also use like a lighter shade. I think that also looks nice for deer, but I decided to go darker today. Then I'm going to move on to some warm grays. I'm using W3, W1, and W00 for the bunny. I've been doing a lot of brown bunnies lately, so I decided to kind of mix it up and go with some grays instead. So I'm going to do my shadows on him with the W3. And since he's faced a little bit more toward the right hand side and his scarf is hanging down on the left, I'm going to add my shadows to the left side of his body, and then pretty much equal on his face because his body is shifted slightly more to the right than his head is. So just trying to, you know, kind of go with each body part kind of and do the shadows that way. So once I had the W3 laid in, I blended out with the W1, and now I'm coming in with the W00. I also added a little W00 to the belly and the inside of the ears, and I left a little white area around his mouth as well. Then I'm going to hang on to that W00 and add in the E70 and E71 for my mouse. I've really been loving this combo for mice lately. I probably should try something different, but it is still relatively new to me combo, and I just really love how cozy and fuzzy it makes them look. So I'm going to stick with it for today and started with the E71, blending out with the E70, and then using that W00 to kind of soften into the white areas, again leaving a little white area on his muzzle, and then I put a little W00 on his belly. Next, I'm moving on to my fox, using my go-to combo for foxes, which is YR18, YR14, and YR12. Still getting used to having my caps over on the right hand side there. I do think it is an improvement with the shadows at the top, but I still haven't figured out if I should go lightest to darkest as I list them over there, or darkest to lightest. I don't know, but anyway, so I'm probably changing it up back and forth here, but I'll get in the hang of things. Anyway, I'm starting with the YR18 for his shadows, and he is fully facing front, so my shadows are pretty much equal on both sides. The only difference is like the lower part of his body is shifted slightly toward the left. You can see there's more of his right leg than there is of his left leg. So just, kind of going with, less shadows or more shadows on the left-hand side and less highlight on that lower part of his leg, but otherwise he's pretty equal. Also putting my highlight on the tip of his tail on the left because, that's where it would be catching the light the most. The part that's behind his body would definitely be cast in more shadow. So I'm going to leave his lower part of his face and his little socks and his belly white for now. Just filling in the rest of his tail. And then for that lower part, I decided to go with E00 and E000. And I'm going to let that fade into the white for the highlight. So the E00 is the shadow. And then I'm going to blend that out with the E0. I also cast a little shadow around his scarf as it's overlapping his belly. And then I'm going to move on and add the same shades for the lower part of my squirrel's face and his belly as well. So that way I don't have to try to find, a whole new selection of light colored markers. Just kind of using the same ones and keeping it kind of consistent, having those colors appear more than once on the scene. I am going to make him a red squirrel since red squirrels are my favorite animal, and I'm going to use E17, E15, and E13 for him. I kind of go the different range of the E-teen markers. Sometimes I'll go a little bit darker and add like an E18 or an E19 even in there. But I decided to go a little lighter today since the other critters were kind of light as well. So I wanted to kind of keep in that same medium to light palette for all of my neutral critters. So I started with the E17, I'm blending out with the E15. Again, he's facing completely forward, so his shadows are completely equal on the right and the left, except for his tail, which is shifted more toward the left, so it's going to be shaded more on the right-hand side. I hope I'm making sense as I'm explaining that. Basically, for my style of coloring, I'm not concerned about whether the light is coming in from the left or the right. Today, it's going to be coming in from both sides because I'm actually going to do 2 lanterns. I only had room to stamp one, so the second one's on an additional piece of paper, but I'm going to color them both identical. So basically, I just keep the light source on the face. That's my go-to because I like the face to look nice and light so you can really see those adorable features and, their personality doesn't get lost. Wherever their face is, that's where the highlight is on my critters. Then I'm going to use RV11 and RV10 for the rosy cheeks. I'm going to use it for the bunny's nose, and then the inside of the ears for everybody except for the squirrel. I tend not to bother doing light tones on darker colored critters, so I just left his to be you know, his fur color. They could be kind of turned to the side anyway, so you wouldn't necessarily see the inside of the ear. So this is a little bit of a cooler tone compared to the normal R20 and R11 that I use, but I think it fits for winter cards because you're in this kind of snowy scene. That's what it's going to be. So having that cooler pink tone, I think, really does add that chilly vibe to the final card at the end. So now I'm ready to start doing some accessories. I'm going to give my bunny a little mint green scarf and matching mittens. I'm using G02, G00, and G quadruple 0. And again, shading on the left because that's where the tails are kind of going. That's where the fabric is bunched and tied. And then I'm going to deepen up this combo by keeping the G02 and adding the G03, G05, and G07. And I'm going to use those shades to do the Christmas wreath on the lantern. So I'm starting with the G07 on the inner part of that wreath. Usually the inner part is the most concave and it's also like the most facing away from the light. So I'm keeping my shadows there. And then I'm going to blend out and go lighter and lighter as I get toward those outside edges. So I use the G05 next and then the G03. And then anything that remains around the outside edge, I'm going to use the G02 to fill in. I filled in the bottom part with the G03 because that would be getting less light. The light is coming from the lantern right above, so the top would get more of a highlight. Then I'm going to move on to some purple shades. These are a bit more of a dusty purple. But I felt like that fit the scene here. I'm using V28, V25, V22, and V20. And I'm going to do my fox's scarf and his mittens as well. Adding in some shading and some little creases in the fabric with that V28. And then blending out with the V25. The tail of the scarf that's kind of behind the other one just got those darkest two shades, but on the rest I did blend out with the V22 and then the V20. And then just like I did with the green shades, I wanted to have like a lighter and darker version of this. So I'm going to do the mouse's scarf as well, but I'm starting with the V25 this time. Blending out with the V22, and then the V20 is going to be the highlight. So it'll be just slightly lighter. And then I'm going to change up and go with some hot pinks. I'm using RV17, RV14, and RV13. And I'll do my deer's scarf and mittens to match. So you can see that I'm using some non-traditional colors for this card. It's just something that I like to do. I think it just gives it an unexpected twist to have like the mint green instead of the traditional Christmassy green, or the hot pink instead of the traditional red, and then throwing in the purple in the mix. It's just something a little bit fun and unexpected, and you know, I'm going to make a lot of cards in this series, so it's nice to kind of have a wide variety of colors between all these cards. So again, I'm going to lighten up this combo slightly by keeping the RV14 and RV13 and then adding in the RV11 to do the squirrel's scarf. And then I realized that I had forgotten to color my fox's mittens, so I had to go back to my purple tones. I just went with the darkest three shades because there's less surface area to color there. So just the V28, V25, and then the V22. And then I'm going to move on to the lantern. So I'm going to use my toner grays for this. I think they're a nice, cool without looking too cold gray, and so it kind of works great for like metallic objects. So I'm using T7, T5, and T3, And for this lantern, I'm going to do my shadows on the right hand side of the lantern because it's going to go on the right hand side of the card. So the light will kind of be bouncing back and forth between the two and lighting up the center where the critters will be standing between them. And then on the lantern that I'm coloring off screen, I'm going to reverse it. So I'll do my shadows on the left hand side for that one. So I just used the T7 the whole way down the right hand side, and then I blended that out with the T5. So the two darkest shades took up about half of the lantern, and then the other half is going to be just the highlight, kind of transitioning between the midtone and the highlight. So I'm just going to fill that all in and make sure to go over the part where the T5 and T3 meet up so that I get a nice smooth blend there. So I did decide to throw in a little bit of red for the Christmas bow on the wreath, but I did go with more pink toned red, like cranberry reds, so that it flows nicely from the hot pinks and isn't like out of place in this scene with the other more pastel shades. So I went with R37, R35, and R32. That R32 especially really lightens this combo up, and it gives it that highlight at the top of the bow where the light would be coming down. And then I'm going to do the little jingle bell strand that the mouse is holding with the R37 and the R35. There's no room for the R32 in there. Then I'm going to do the bells with Y26, and that looked a little too flat for me, so I did add in a little Y28 and just added a touch of that in there. And then I used E40 for the music paper that the squirrel and the bunny were holding. So the coloring is done for these critters, but I wanted to add in a little extra detail. So I took a white Sakura Jelly Roll pen, and I'm going to add some polka dots to a few of the scarves. I'm going to do it on the fox, and I will do that on the squirrel as well. There's not a ton of room to fit them in there, but I'm just trying my best to go around that music paper that he's holding and then down the scarf as well, just spreading those out. And then, of course, I'm going to go over the eyes of the critters with a black Sakura Jelly Roll pen, just for the ones that have their eyes open. So it's the deer, the bunny, and the squirrel. And I got a little smudge on the bunny, but I was able to fix that off screen with a sand eraser, which I've showed you guys before. And then I'm going to trim these images out with their matching dies. For my background, I'm going to take the new Snowy Countryside Square Scene die from Hello Bluebird and trim that out of another piece of Spectrum Noir cardstock, and I decided to do something different today and actually color this die in with Copic markers as well. So I just left the whole thing on my cutting plate because it just made it easier to keep the whole scene intact. And I'm adding some Frosty Glow to each of the snowdrifts using the G quadruple 0, which is the lightest shade that I used on the bunny's scarf. Next, I'm going to work on the trees, and I'm going back to the combo that I used on the Christmas wreath. So I'm using G07 as the darkest, and I'm going to put my shading on the right hand side for the trees on the right, and then I'll put it on the left hand side for the trees on the left. And I am separating out most of these trees by drawing an extra little line in there to kind of indicate the separation between each of the sections. The only one I didn't do that for is the last one on the left, since it's more of a triangle shape. So from the G07 7, I'm going to jump down to the G03 because there's a lot smaller surface area to color here. So I didn't think I needed to use the G05 in the mix. So I'm just going straight over the edge of the G07 with the G03 and blending that out a bit. And I'm going to do that for all of them. Just trying to stay within the lines of the die cut. I really don't want to get any of this dark green on that background sky piece. And then I'm going to come in with the G02, which is going to be my lightest, and just fill the rest of these trees in. And honestly, I kind of wish that I had jumped down again and done like the G00 instead of the G02, just to be a little bit lighter on that highlighted area, but it's fine. This background I want to be kind of pushed back in the scene. It's not really the focus of this card by any means, so it's not a big deal. I still think the blend looks nice. So for the tree trunks, I decided to go back to the E44, which was the lighter of the two shades that I used on the reindeer's antlers. And I did get a tiny bit of brown on one of the snowdrifts, but it's not super noticeable. And then for the house, I was going back and forth on what to do, but decided to just use a light pink. So I went with the RV10, which I used on the cheeks of the critters, and then I blended that out with RV00, and I just did the whole house the same. Then I used my colorless blender to push back the pink that got in the windows, and decided to use Y000 for that. Just a little touch of that. So then I needed to do the sky, and I believe I grabbed BG70 first, which is a very desaturated aqua. Again, I wanted this sky to kind of fade into the distance. Yes, it was the BG70. I didn't want it to be really powerful and kind of pull forward. I wanted the critters to be up front and center, and the background, because it's so far set back, you know, on 3 different hills back there. I wanted it to just kind of just be something that kind of faded into the distance. So I decided to go with these lighter tones there. I did do a double layer of them, and I'm just flicking up from the horizon line at the bottom of this sky portion and kind of letting it fade as I get toward the top of the scene, and it'll look more blended too as that ink dries back a bit. But yeah, just something really subtle. And then because it was a little too blue and I wanted it to match better with the coloring, I went back to the G000 that I had used on the snow and just added a bit of that into the mix as well to kind of tint it a bit more toward that green part. And then I did try to kind of remove that little bit of brown from that one tree branch or tree trunk. So then I'm going to start taking this scene apart so that I can add it to my card base. This die does measure 5 1/4 by 5 1/4. So I trimmed my card base down to be 5 1/4 by 10 1/2, and then scored it at the 5 1/4 mark. So it's 5 1/4 by 5 1/4. And I started with the frame, and then I'm just fitting in each of the sections of these snowdrifts from the bottom to the top using my Barely Art Precision Craft Glue. Very easy to put this scene together. And by the way, that card base is made of MFT snow cone cardstock, which is my absolute most favorite color of cardstock. So next I'm going to take the larger sky section, and any of the trees that stayed in the die cut, I just left them there because it's a little bit easier to adhere them, but a couple of them and the house did fall out when I lifted up this piece. No big deal. It's very easy to fit them back in. So I'm just going to grab those extra pieces and pop them into the little spaces that are kind of left by those dies. And they're all slightly different sizes too, so it's very easy to see which tree fits in where. And this die actually comes with additional houses and trees, so you could die cut extra ones and kind of fill in all the different hills and stuff with more houses and trees, but I decided to just leave it to the top for this one because the critters are going to be taking up most of the lower part of this scene. For the tiny little windows, I figured the easiest thing to do would be to pop a little bit of glue in the spaces, and then I used my Studio Katia embellishment wand to pick those off of my cutting plate and just pop them into place. So I wanted to add a bit more color to the outside edges, so I die cut one more frame using that same MFT snow cone cardstock that I used for the base. So the frame and the base will match, and I just put that on the outside edge right over top of the white one. And then I popped this into my MISTI so that I could stamp my sentiment. I'm using Lawn Fawn Merman ink to stamp Here We Come A-Caroling. And I'm stamping that down a couple times to make sure it's nice and bold, especially since it's such a delicate sentiment. And then I'll pop that card open so I can stamp on the inside. And I'm going to do the two critters that I didn't get on the outside, plus another sentiment that says, "We wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year," and a few of the musical notes. And I did stamp down a third time for the moose because he wasn't quite as dark as the bear. So now I'm ready to start assembling the front of this scene, and there you can see the two lanterns, just kind of placing those out and making sure that I have them where I want them. And the die does cut out the inner portion of those lanterns, so you could color in the little inner portions and then pop those back in just like I did with the windows on the house. I just left them plain because it wasn't a very dark scene, so I didn't want it to look like nighttime. It's more like, I don't know, very early evening maybe, you know, with that sky that's still kind of blue. So I'm going to lay out my critters. I want the 3 shorter critters to be down in front and then the 2 taller critters to kind of be in the back row there. So I'm just getting my placement right, and then I can start gluing these guys down, just kind of tucking them behind, starting with the larger ones. And you know, using my Barely Art Precision craft glue again because it gets in all those little tiny places like the reindeer's antlers and all of that. So I'm going to put the fox behind. I put him, he's kind of standing a little bit higher than the reindeer is. They're kind of on the curve of that bottom snowdrift. But that just gives me a little bit more height for him as well so that the bunny and the squirrel don't cover up too much of his body. And then I'll add my 3 critters down below. I just love these guys. I think their faces are so sweet. And then I have 5 different musical notes. I believe there's 5 in this stamp set, so I did use all of them. And I'm just going to kind of stagger them around to fill in the top portion of the card between the fox and the reindeer, making sure I have them where I want them. And then because they are so small, I'm going to use my EK Success reverse tweezers to kind of grab them, and then I can add my liquid glue to the back and press them down into place just where I want them. I'm thinking that I'm going to actually send this particular card to my grandma this year. She loves music. She is a wonderful pianist, and her name is Carol. So I just thought it kind of goes, you know, Christmas carols. So I thought she might really enjoy this card. And she also really loves like cute critters and stuff like that. Maybe that's where I get it from. Plus, she really just loves my cards. She has them on display whenever I go over to see them, so it's just kind of fun to know that somebody is going to cherish all the hard work that you put into them. So of course this card needed a bit of sparkle, so I'm going to use my favorite Stardust Stickles and add some glitter to the ribbons on my Christmas wreaths on my lanterns. I'm also going to add it to the scarves of the 3 critters that don't have the white gel pen. You don't want to put the Stardust Stickles or any kind of glitter glue on top of white gel pen because it will make it dissolve and it'll, kind of get all murky. So just on the 3 without it, and then I also am going to add it to my Christmas trees. So I'm just putting it where the shading is. So I put it on the left for the section on the left of the card, and then on the right for the ones on the right. And then I also added just a touch to the windows of the house in the background. So that is going to finish up this card. I think it's kind of fun to do a square card every once in a while too. There's a closer look at all of that detail and another peek at the inside. So I hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and leave me a comment down below. Subscribe if you haven't already. Ring that notification bell so you never miss a video. I'm going to be posting tons for the holiday season. All of the products that I use will be listed and linked in the description bar below if you'd like to pick up something for yourself. And if you'd like to keep watching, here is day 6 of the previous 2 years of holiday card series. You can click on either one to check them out. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you had a good one, and I'll see you soon in another video. Bye-bye.